Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're going to be talking about ethics this Friday. Now, a few years ago, North Dakota voters created the North Dakota Ethics Commission by way of a ballot measure. And we could have a debate about whether that's the best way to do that. My feelings about ballot measures are pretty clear. I don't think they're a good way to make public policy. But it exists, and the Ethics Commission exists, and we have to, it's becoming more and more important, and we certainly saw in this last election cycle, it's becoming something that we talk about a lot. And so how the Ethics Commission performs and everything else, these are important questions, and we're going to talk about some of that. We're also going to talk about the fact that there is an opening on the Ethics Commission itself. And to talk about that with us and my co-host Chad Oban is Rebecca Binstock. She is the Executive Director of the North Dakota Ethics Commission. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Rob and Chad.
Let's get the first question out of the way. You guys have an opening on the Ethics Commission. Describe, who can apply for that? What does that process look like? And what does it mean to serve on the Ethics Commission?
All right. So that's like a three-part question, Rob, right? So, okay. So first of all, any North Dakota resident can serve on the Ethics Commission, which is, it really presents kind of this unique opportunity to be involved in state government and really have this ability to foster this culture of integrity and transparency that the Ethics Commission is working on. So now, who can apply? There are some what I call limitations. So who can't apply might be the better question, is because if you serve in certain roles, for instance, if you're elected, if you're appointed, if you're a lobbyist, if you are a political party official, then you can't apply for the Ethics Commission. And so
are those things only currently? Like if somebody was the chair of the North Dakota Democratic Party 10 years ago, but isn't currently, could they apply today?
Yes, they could. That's a great question. Rob. So it's if they are currently in that role, right? So really what the commission, now I want to be really clear, the commission, meaning me as the executive director, the 5 commissioners and our staff, we don't have any say in who the commissioner is going to be. The new one, the opening, that is selected by the governor, the Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate Minority Leader based on consensus agreement. So those 3 have to sit down and agree on somebody to fill this position. And so our role is really to kind of get a great applicant pool. So we call ourselves the logistical support for this process, and really just getting the word out there that if you have any interest in this area, go ahead and apply. And then those 3 select. So I can tell you what works great about our current 5 commissioners and what I think would continue having a great commission. And that is having a varied background. So we don't have 5 lawyers on the commission. That would not probably work very well. We have somebody from education, we have attorneys, we have people from the military, we have individuals who have local political experience, and they all bring their varied and diverse backgrounds to the table. And that creates this really unique environment, and it's really great to see and work with. So I think that answered the 3 questions.
Yeah. Well, you should know Rob limiting it to 3 questions is pretty good for his opening question here. I have maybe a multifaceted question, but when the Ethics Commission passed, I think there was lots of confusion on how this would play out. And I would suggest that we have more sort of ethical issues that we see in the press now than we did when this thing was passed, between legislators' campaigns and that kind of thing. Can you walk us through, I file a complaint and I can do that anonymously, or I can add my name to it. Is that correct? There's part 1 of the question, by the way. And then what happens? So you guys go through an investigation. Does the Ethics Commission suggest charges to a local state's attorney? Or what's the point of all of this?
Okay. So again, multifaceted question. So step 1 is somebody can file a complaint with the Ethics Commission. And so that process can be done either, you can file a complaint form. It's available on our website. go ahead. It's currently a PDF. In the next few weeks or months, it's actually going to be an online fillable document that'll work a lot better. And you can go ahead and fill that out. You can then choose on that form whether you remain confidential. So we still, as commission staff, need to verify that you're either a North Dakota resident, because we don't want, there's always been this kind of sense of keeping this within our state, right? And so having a North Dakota resident, we need to make sure that you're a North Dakota resident, or that you are licensed, or you're somehow subject to a board or a commission that is subject to the commission rules. So the commission, that's kind of a unique ad that we added during the 2023 session. So we make sure that the person who files the complaint is within that definition, right? But you can choose to remain confidential. That is what there is. So there's that option. You can also call us. People call us. That is still considered a complaint. A complaint can be taken in any form, in an email, in a phone call, or somebody just coming up to us and talking to us. But we do need to make sure that they want it to be a filed complaint, and then we can proceed. So once we move past that initial, somebody reaches out to us, then what we do is we enter into what we call our 3-step process. So in the statute in 5466 of the Century Code, it outlines kind of a process that then is supplemented by the commission's own rules that they adopted. I believe that one was in 2019 or 2020. And so what it does is you have an initial review that happens. First step. When I say we, I say either the commission or staff, right? We review it, and really what we're reviewing it for is, do we have jurisdiction? Is this against somebody who the commission has jurisdiction over? Is there anything to this? Is it an outlandish allegation that has no substance and has nothing to it? And we do that initial review. So that is the very first thing that we do. Once we establish that we have jurisdiction over a complaint, the subject matter and the person of that complaint, then we move to informal resolution. So there is a requirement that we walk through an informal resolution process between the complainant, who may or may not be confidential, and the respondent. Now, we use the word respondent, meaning the person against whom the complaint is filed. Now, at that point, we really still have not dove into the substance, whether the allegations themselves are true in the complaint. That does not happen till our 3rd step. But under the statute, we're really required to walk through that informal resolution process. And sometimes that works well. Sometimes parties say, nope, I want the respondent, meaning the public official, or it could be a lobbyist who's in that position, or a candidate for office. We want them to resign. We want them to stop lobbying. It's kind of an extreme situation. Now, the commission does not have the authority to kick somebody out of office, right? So we need to then try to kind of get them to meet in the middle. If we don't informally resolve something, then we move into an investigation. And at that point, then we're fully investigating a complaint. There is this 3-step process and this is kind of what most other ethics commissions do across the country. It's slightly modified based upon authority and jurisdiction, and how their process works. Some of them move into more of a lawsuit instead of investigation. But that's kind of the basics of how it happens. So then at the end, Chad, then you get to the end and you're like, what happens here? Okay. So then we have where the commission, as executive director, I prepare a report and recommendation for the commission. And then the commission will either adopt that, and they'll have an order that has findings, has information in it. And then it either does one of two things. It can assess, depending on what sort of allegations we're talking about. It could assess a civil penalty. Now, I probably used the wrong word. I don't think it's penalty. I think it's like a civil. I don't have the rule in front of me.
I think it's remedy or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a civil remedy. We don't use the word penalty, okay? And that can happen. The other thing that the commission is directed to do in statute is then, if there is another entity that can enforce something and has enforcement authority, we then hand over the report, or we would hand over the report to that entity, and then they can take that and then they can enforce something as needed. So there's kind of this two-part thing. But at the point where the commission has the report or issues a report, issues an order, now everything becomes open. Because as I walk through this 3-step process, that whole process is confidential. So we're not talking about it. Everything is kept confidential to the extent that we can. And then once that report is issued and there's a violation, if there is a violation found, then it becomes open. So then that report becomes open. Now, I'm going to tell you, this process, we have not been all the way through this process yet, and I saw your eyebrows go up there, Chad, like, what? You haven't been all the way through the process? And that is because of how complaints have originally came into the commission. Numbers were low. I think there was, we didn't have a lot of complaints coming in, and now we have had an uptick, and we're able to work those through the process. And so we are doing that. So I anticipate we'll get there, and we will get there, and it's going to happen. So I hope that answered your question. I feel like that was a really long answer.
Well, I want to drill in a little bit. I want to talk about the confidentiality part of it, because this seems like a double-edged sword, and I think it's something that we're going to have to grapple with in the future. But how much discretion does the commission have? Like, if something comes in that's outlandish, I think we can all understand, somebody's saying, Governor Burgum's holding Bigfoot hostage in the Capitol or something. I think we can say, okay, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. But, I mean, ethics is kind of like porn, right? In the context of like the famous Potter Stewart definition of I know it when I see it.
You see that, yeah.
I think it becomes, so how much when somebody comes, I mean, how much discretion does do they have is there a point in that process where the commission holds a vote whether, listen, we're just going to dismiss this, or we're gonna proceed down the steps that you just talked about? I mean, that's got to be a part of it.
So it is. That's a really good question. I want to touch base on that. I actually didn't answer part of Chad's question regarding referring for a criminal complaint, right? I'm going to get back. I'll come back to that. Don't let me forget about that. But Rob, to answer your question, so really how we look at it, and you got to keep in mind my background. I'm an attorney. We have general counsel. So we really use a kind of a legal standard of, is there sufficient allegations? Is there sufficient allegations? If we assume that those are true, would that even fall within our jurisdiction? So, for instance, in your example, if Governor Burgum is holding Bigfoot hostage in the vault in the Capitol, well, I don't have jurisdiction over that, even if it was true. Even if I presume that was true, it's not true, I'm guessing. But
you wish it was true. I wish that was true. It was in the Capitol.
Sure. But so what we end up doing, Rob, is we end up actually, for each complaint, before we summarily dismiss it at that point, or we move it into investigation / informal resolution, we prepare a report. It's confidential, right? We do it in executive session. We prepare that for the commission, and then they can see if this is in fact what we should be doing, or if we should be, if they want to give us different direction.
And that's kind of at the commission's discretion, though. Like you provide them the report, and then they have some discretion on, are we going to go down this road or not?
They have, I think they have a little bit of discretion, but I think it's more of a legal standard than a discretionary standard that they apply. I mean, what we call it is probably nomenclature, but, yes, I think they do have a little bit of discretion. I think in most cases, what we have found is it's pretty clear which direction we need to go. Because a lot of the things that we can quote, we call it summarily dismissing it. Basically, we've reviewed it. There's nothing there. We're going to summarily dismiss this. A lot of times we know we don't have jurisdiction over the person. We know we don't have jurisdiction over the subject matter. Maybe it's something against a local county official, or it's against a judge or an attorney, or it's outside of our limitations period. It happened 5 years ago. We can only look back 3 years. There's something there that we know that we can't, that we don't have jurisdiction over it. So that's why we can summarily dismiss those kinds of things. There has been maybe a few where it's been more discretionary, but for the most part, I think it's been pretty clear.
You're going to refer to the criminal referral, and then I have a question after that.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. So there's a statute, and I always want to say it's 546608, but I actually think it's 546612, that directs the commission at any point, if we have a belief that there is a possibility that a crime has been committed, that we are required, it is a must standard, we are required to refer that to the appropriate law enforcement agency. Usually that's going to be a state's attorney who's doing that.
Gotcha.
Yes, so there's that statute, but it's a must. We don't have, in that instance, the commission does not have discretion.
So one of the things that opponents of the Ethics Commission being set up, and I supported the Ethics Commission, and now, I mean, it's here, right? One of the concerns they laid out that it would be sort of weaponized for political gains. And I think we sort of saw that a little bit in June, right? I mean, you have complaints being filed, and the person who's filing the complaint goes public with, I filed the complaint against this person. I know we're not going to talk about specifics, but is there a scenario, and you said that we haven't gone through the whole process yet, so that person who has a complaint filed against them, it's in the public eye because the person who filed the complaint put it in the public eye. This process takes a certain amount of time before they're exonerated or whatever. What is that level of time? What sort of rights do the folks who are being accused of things have throughout this process?
So throughout the process, so first of all, with the confidentiality, right, that certainly has come up, right? So yes, we say that the confidential, the complaints are confidential. That doesn't preclude somebody who filed a complaint who's not subject to the confidentiality provisions. For instance, a public citizen, they can go and take that to the press. What then can happen then is the person who's the respondent, if the respondent is in fact a public official or a state employee, they don't get to do that because they're bound by confidentiality. And if you share confidential information, as you likely know, it's a felony of some sort that I can't remember off the top of my head. So they're not going to do that. Now, what we see in other states and how they address that, Chad, is they actually exempt the respondent from the confidentiality. So they can respond and not wait. So that's something, as we get towards legislative session, those are things that we're having discussions about, is how to improve that process. And it might be, there might be a few different ways that we can do that. But we're looking at, when it comes to confidentiality, is how do other states who've been doing this a lot longer and have a lot more experience with this, how do they address that and how do they manage that? And that's one of the ways that they do it, is they let the respondent, they basically exempt the respondent from doing that, and so that they can do that. So they can respond publicly to the underlying facts, right? To the underlying facts. Now, what rights does the respondent have in the process? They're notified of everything. They get copies of everything to the extent that that can be provided, because keep in mind, we have to maintain the confidentiality of the complainant if they choose that. So then we have to redact things if needed, or we provide summaries, but they receive that information along the way. They have an opportunity to respond. They have an opportunity to participate in certain aspects of it once it gets to the investigation stage, right? So now I will say that when it comes to the process, a lot of times we'll notify somebody, and we don't send out the complaints right away, because if we look at our dismissal rate versus moving to informal resolution investigation rate, we dismiss quite a few more. So I'm going to just review that and dismiss it, and then I'll get you everything all in one. It's just kind of more of a logistical thing for our office, that it's easier to do it that way. And we've tried to change legislation to align better to timelines so that we can do that kind of more in a package deal. And so that's kind of, I think that answers your question.
What's the timeline? I mean, from a complaint going in to going through the whole process, or do you have a goal for timeline, or is it like every case is different?
So every case is different, obviously. We have a goal. We have the goal to get it done as quickly as we possibly can. Here's where we run into limitations, is the fact that we have a small staff. We're small, but we're mighty, but we do have a small staff. We have myself, we have a general counsel, which we brought on last September. And then we have a operations administrator who really kind of controls our operations. And so or handles our operations, I should say. So we are restricted on the amount of time and the amount of manpower, people power that we have when we have these complaints. If something is summarily dismissed, sometimes we can wrap that up in a matter of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. If we need to move it to informal resolution or investigation, it does take a little bit of time. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that if there is a criminal referral where we're required to refer something for criminal prosecution, the Ethics Commission investigation is halted. So the statute requires that the Ethics Commission not take any action. So if you have that interruption, it's going to delay the process even longer. And so do I have a goal? Yeah, I would love to get them all turned around in 6 months, 9 months, something. But it does take time. The other thing is we need to do quite a bit of research when complaints come in, because many times complainants bring something to us. They know the facts. They kind of know the law, but they don't have an attorney assisting them. So we need to review it and see if there's anything there. And we need to make sure that we give that a full review. So we compare it to a pro se litigant filing something with a court. There's something usually, or people usually that review those and do an initial review, and we kind of treat it very similar.
One of the, I could provide an anecdote just to kind of illustrate how sticky some of this has gotten. During the recent primaries, I had multiple people contact me telling me that they weren't the people who filed the complaint, but someone had filed an ethics complaint against a candidate and wanting me to write a story about this. And my problem is I'm thinking, okay, so, and Rebecca, you are, and I made some inquiries to you even, and you are going to confirm or deny whether there's anything, right? So I'm in a position of, they want me to write a story about some anonymous person who filed a complaint against a named candidate, but I can't verify whether a complaint's actually been there. I don't have the substance of the complaint in front of me. I'm just supposed to, and I didn't write those stories. I've made a decision. I'm not pursuing those. There's not enough here, and I don't think it's fair to the person we're targeting. So that's a difficult thing. You said that there's been an uptick. Can you give us some numbers? Because I think you're right. I mean, it seemed like for a while we weren't hearing a lot, and then all of a sudden, I know just from what I get, it seemed like all of a sudden a lot of people were filing things. So do you have some numbers? What does uptick mean?
Yep, I do. Hold on. And I only say that, okay, so this is a good, now I want to be clear, this is just our complaints. There are other filings that are required by the Ethics Commission under other rules that have also similarly increased. Some of them have had a really significant increase because they went into effect prior to this last legislative session. So we have those as well. But as far as complaints go, so the Ethics Commission was created in 2018. So 2019 was really the first time anybody could file a complaint. And in 2019, there was two. There was 2 complaints. In 2020, there was 3. In 2021, we start to have a little increase. There's 9. In 2022, there was 14. I will say in 2022, 10 of those were in the last 3 months of 2022. So prior to, from January to September of 2022, we had only received 4 complaints. And then in September, it was actually probably October of 2022, that's when we had more complaints come in. In 2023, we had 14. And then in 2024, and this is as of, I believe yesterday, we've had 25 complaints this year. So we do have an uptick. We currently have, now just to give you an idea of how many of these we've processed, out of all of those, and I'm not great at math, so don't ask me to add them up quick, but I think it's around 60 some. We have 25 pending as of today that are either in an initial review stage, an informal resolution stage, or an investigation stage.
So that was 67 since 29.
Yeah, here we go.
So according to my quick envelope math.
Yeah.
So
attaboy, Rob.
well, hey, that's what I'm here for. And those are good numbers too. I mean, I think people need to understand, what that's been. I think that's important context. One of the things I really struggled with, I oppose the creation of the ethics measure. A part of it, again, because I think this is a hugely complicated question, and I think the ballot box is a terrible place to do it. Because I would argue that a lot of the struggles we've had, I don't know, maybe struggles is the wrong word, but maybe the complication we've had in implementing the Ethics Commission is a result of the fact that we didn't have a legislative process around this. We had a ballot box process around it, and there's not a lot of nuance there. Anyway, I'm going off topic. What do you say to the people? I mean, what does this process serve? Because I'm looking at it like a lot of times if somebody's, hey, I don't know that ethics indexes well to the presence of an ethics commission. Congress has all sorts of ethics commissions. I wouldn't say that Congress behaves all that ethically. Places like Chicago have had ethics commissions for a long time, and they are famous for their corruption. So I don't know. I don't know how well this works as a mechanism. To me, it's we stay more basic in terms of we require lots of disclosure. We have transparency, and we support a robust news media. And maybe I'm being a little self-serving because I'm part of that news media, but we have a robust news media to report those stories and put the questions in front of voters and hold people accountable that way. So, kind of defend this process, because in you describing it, I'll be honest, it seems really complicated, really opaque. And part of me wonders, is the juice worth the squeeze here?
Mm-hmm. So, Rob, I think that your question is really valid. And I'm going to be the first one. I've said this publicly. Ethics commissions alone do not create an ethical government. Alone. They cannot. It is I compare it to a three-legged stool. Okay? So in North Dakota, what the Ethics Commission, they're trying to increase transparency to create or have accountability. So I view it as my job as executive director. How can we increase transparency? That's my job. So yes, we have the complaint process, but some of the other things that are happening where we have disclosure requirements, we have meeting notices, the commission is looking at financial disclosure rules in our state. Those need a definite update in North Dakota, I would say. So providing that transparency is part of the solution to reach an ethical government, okay? That's one leg. So the Ethics Commission is one leg. The second leg is the press. The second leg is people who know what's going on. They look at the numbers, they look at what information is out there, and they write about it and they inform the public, okay? The other part is the voters. So the third leg is the voters. And they need to then be engaged, and they need to see what an ethics commission is doing, need to be involved. And so you need all three of those. So when it comes to the North Dakota Ethics Commission, we are thinking about ways that we can increase transparency. And that really is some of the rules that we're looking at. And I do think that you're right. I want to take a step back because I'm going, it's 2024. This was in place and, put in 2018. That's almost, we're coming up on 6 years. Like, let's do some things here, right? And I think that process has taken time because we have relationships that needed to get built. We have communication channels that needed to get built, and we are in the process of doing that. So at the same time, if we look at ethics commissions across the country, and ethics, they call them ethics commissions, they call them ethics committees. You referenced Chicago. They have multiple ethics commissions. They have a state ethics commission, they have a city ethics commission, they have a county ethics commission. We have one. Now, when it comes to the role the ethics commission plays, we have constitutional duties. We have two constitutional duties. The ethics commission has constitutional duties to adopt and create rules regarding our 4 buckets: transparency, corruption, elections, and lobbying. They also then have to investigate. There is an inherent third bucket or third directive that the Ethics Commission in North Dakota has to do, and that is provide guidance and education. Because a lot of times when you talk about government, if you look at how fast legislative session happens, it happens fast. And so if you can create a structure that helps people manage conflicts, be ethically aware, like be aware that this might create an issue, and be able to come to somebody and say, I have this issue. Can you help me work through it? What is the process that I should follow? And sometimes we've had, in North Dakota in particular, we've had a culture that's been around. I mean, if you listen to our webinars that we've been doing lately, we talk about this historical perspective on ethical decision making in North Dakota, and there is a culture that is developed, and it's reteaching, and it's rethinking about how we evaluate circumstances, how we evaluate government actions. And yes, the Ethics Commission can do some of it, but it can't do it alone. And I think that gets missed on a federal level. It gets missed on many levels, but that's what, when you look at the North Dakota Ethics Commission, if people actually look at what we're doing, we have a strategic plan of creating ethical awareness through education, making sure that people have resources. If they have questions, they can reach out to us. We can't provide attorney advice, right? We're not their attorney, but we can guide them to what they need to look at. So when I talk about, they call it a transparency cycle that you need all three things. So I'll go out and I'll talk to high school students saying, you need to participate. I can do my job and I can share all the information that I want to. I can get financial disclosures out. We can be talking about things that need fixing in the state government, but unless somebody votes or chooses to vote based on that information, then it doesn't work and it falls apart, right? So it is a three-legged stool that we all need to create this more transparent and ethical government. Man, that was a really long answer, Rob. Sorry about that.
Oh, well, it was in your defense, it was a complicated question.
Yeah. We're coming up against it here, but I have one other quick question that I just want to understand. What is the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission over elections? So if there's a candidate who's lying about one of their opponents in the mail or on TV, if they're not properly filing financial disclosures, putting on proper disclaimer stuff that they're sending out, what's the Ethics Commission role and all that kind of stuff?
So, Chad, that's going to be a question that depends on the facts of the case or of what comes before us, okay? So currently the commission does not have any rules regarding elections. That was something back in the June meeting, the commission directed staff to prepare draft rules. Now, we're going to work with the legislature on that. We're going to have to in order to get those in place so that we can address some of the issues that we have seen, okay? But currently the commission does not have rules related to that, okay? But if it has a failure of disclosure, if it is a violation of some criminal statute, then the commission is required to turn that over to whichever state's attorney would investigate that. And we are required under the statute to do that. So if we get a complaint that alleges that, we then have to go and refer it. But keep in mind, there's no rule for us currently to handle that. So what the commission is looking at is having a rule that has a civil administrative process that would supplement this criminal aspect of it. And that would be how we would work through it in the future. So that is what we are currently working on.
Well, this has been a fascinating interview, and I feel like we could go for another half hour, but we only booked you for a half hour. So I appreciate you coming on. I am really excited about the idea of the Ethics Commission being, in some ways, in fact, I was thinking of a headline for a future column as you were talking, and it's like, I feel like the Ethics Commission, we talk about it in the context of complaints filed all the time. That process may be the least important thing the Ethics Commission does. I think the way the Ethics Commission could better serve the state is if we could turn it into a clearinghouse for, and just as one example, for campaign finance. I mean, maybe instead of filing them with the Secretary of State's office, the Ethics Commission sits astride the campaign finance reports. Then when somebody doesn't file, and instead of everything being a misdemeanor criminal thing or an infraction if you don't have the right disclaimer on your campaign sign, maybe there's a civil remedy Because I think it's problematic putting some of that in the criminal code. I'm not really interested in seeing somebody go to. I'm not really interested in seeing somebody go to jail because they didn't have the right disclaimer on their campaign sign. I wouldn't mind them maybe hitting them where it really hurts and giving them a fine where they have to pay something.
And make it a fine that matters. I mean, right now it's a $25 fine if you don't file.
$25, yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a joke.
I just want to make it really clear. The Ethics Commission does not want to take over the filing from the Secretary of State. They've worked really hard to get that. They're working through an update, but there's the enforcement side.
Sure.
Right.
Okay,
and so
sure.
having a non.
I'm just spitballing ideas.
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Just because you don't want it doesn't mean Rob's not going to give it to you.
Thankfully, I don't think Rob can legislate authority to us. So,
oh, challenge accepted.
No, I cannot. We are all overestimating Rob's influence a great deal here. All right, we really do have to interview. This has been fun, Rebecca, and I feel like we should have you on because I do think the Ethics Commission has the potential to be a force for good in North Dakota, even in these divided times where part of the problem here, you said what voters have to care. Yeah. Voters have to set aside partisanship and want ethical behavior and stop defending unethical behavior because it happens to come from politicians they like. And that's a whole other problem that is well beyond the scope of the Ethics Commission.
Yeah, we usually cover that in the second half of these interviews.
Well, in fact, we're going to end the interview now, and Chad and I can expound upon that in the second half. Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca.
yeah, thanks, guys.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out the Vault at inforum.com/the Vault and subscribe to the Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
We just finished frankly, what I thought was a fascinating interview with Rebecca Binstock from the Ethics Commission. And I say fascinating because, again, and this is, I don't want this to seem like I'm being critical of the current commissioners or critical of Rebecca Binstock, but I think I really wish the genesis of the Ethics Commission had been different and we could have been more intentional about the way we went into this because, again, I think we're really, really focused on the complaints. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But the potential for what the Ethics Commission could do in consolidating some of the transparency, it's financial disclosures from lawmakers, right? I mean, do you know how to find them? I guess I do, but they're not that easy to find.
I don't. And the only one I've probably ever looked at was Aaron's,
right?
Frankly. I have no idea where to find them.
Yeah. So that's, to be honest with you, I don't request them that often. But if they were more accessible, and that's just one example. I think there's a real, and I don't want to start a turf battle with the Secretary of State's office, but I think there's something about making the Ethics Commission the enforcement arm. I think the problem is a lot of campaign finance, and if somebody doesn't file their campaign disclosures on time, which last cycle, in the 2022 cycle, we had a statewide candidate, Melanie Moniz, who was running for the Public Service Commission, who went just about the entire election cycle without filing a single campaign disclosure.
Well, I think I've told you before about, I'm involved in obviously a PAC at work where I know we've donated to candidates and it's on our disbursements, but it's not on their contributions that came in.
Right.
I don't know what to do with that information. And, and sometimes it's just a mistake. And how do we fix those things? But there's no motivation right now to do campaign finance in a good way because the fine is $25. Right. And so there has to be something more substantial because this is important stuff.
Right. But I think it's problematic putting some of this stuff in the criminal code because when you put in the criminal code, now it kicks in all sorts of stuff. Our criminal process is very complicated for a lot of excellent reasons. But some of this stuff, I think there is a level of, when it's not just a mistake or if it's relatively small, I'm not real concerned about, whacking people with felonies or even misdemeanors. But I do want to hit them where it hurts. Like you need to do this stuff in a timely way. And if you don't, it's going to cost your campaign. And a $500 fine for a legislative campaign or a $1,000 fine for a legislative campaign, And we can have an escalating thing where if somebody is errors over and over and over again, well, then maybe there's a point at which that can then be kicked over to the criminal side and say, listen, this person's just not.
Yeah, and I think as long as we're state's attorneys to enforce this stuff, it's not going to happen. Frankly, they have bigger things to worry about.
And they have no incentive. They
Yeah.
have no incentive to, first of all, to wade into a political dispute, which is what it's going to be.
Right.
They have other far more serious crimes that the public's more concerned about, like drugs and human trafficking and all the other things, that drunk driving, all the other things that they're tasked with. Whether or not somebody had the proper disclosure on a campaign sign is never going to be that important to a state's attorney.
Right. And what I'm more concerned about than, the proper disclaimer on a yard sign is these things are getting expensive, right? If you have independent groups who are coming in and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're not properly disclosing who's paying for the ads and those kind of things. I mean, we're not that far away from those kind of things taking place. And I love the idea of I would like the Ethics Commission to be a clearinghouse for when people lie about their opponents. I mean, we saw it from Brandon Pritchard, this stuff that he was saying all over the state. And I don't know how that would work, but there has to be some sort of deterrent for people to just completely lie about their opponents. And so, and I don't know if
that one's tougher because the First Amendment comes into play. That one's harder. But I mean, you start thinking about clear cut, like your report was due on this date and you didn't file it until this date. You're going to get dinged. And then there's a process and somebody's watching, or even if somebody's not watching, if somebody in the public notices, like if you or I notice, Chad, and we could just send over an anonymous thing saying, hey, you need to look at this report because things aren't adding up. And then they could take it from there. Perfect.
I just looked at a report for one of the constitutional measures that's on the ballot. And I don't know the numbers exactly, but they raised 28, spent 27, and somehow have $34,000 cash on hand. I'm not that good at math, but 28 minus 27 does not equal 34. And so it's a simple math problem, but those kind of things. That it's just wrong. I mean, something's clearly wrong on that report.
Right. And maybe it's an honest error, or maybe something else is going on, but we need a mechanism where that could be investigated quickly. And I don't know, all due respect to Secretary of State Michael Howell, who I think does an excellent job. It's not really his job. He doesn't really have the authority, nor does he really have the resources to do it. I mean, his office can reach out and say, listen, things aren't adding up, what's going on, and ask them to file an amended report, but there's no teeth to that process.
And he can fine them, and I think it's escalating from $25 to $100 if they don't, and they can send out a notice, but what kind of mechanism is there to chase down the fine or do anything like that? I mean, I don't know. But
the worst thing that's going to happen is they might get some bad press if somebody like me writes about it, right? And even there, nobody's going to care.
Yeah. So places aren't competitive enough for that to matter. There. Yeah. You and I are both, more transparency is better for the process. On the back end, it's harder for campaigns, but I mean, if you're getting a bunch of money in, and that should be transparent of who's funding your campaign, voters can do what they want with that information.
I just think, I think the Ethics Commission right now needs to be focused on low-hanging fruit. Some of the stuff we've been focused on, like your thing about whether or not someone's lying, that is not low-hanging fruit. That's really complicated.
It's complicated.
I would rather move, let's get some of the low-hanging fruit nailed down. Or some of the stuff like, is X behavior ethical behavior? Again, it's tough.
What I don't like about, I will tell you, when she was talking about when we saw an increase in 2022, it was around October of 2022. Well, that's election time. Right. And I do worry that some of the folks that didn't like the Ethics Commission, that they're being proven a little bit true. The stuff that, about Emily O'Brien, and I don't know if there's actually any there on the complaints, but the fact that the complaint was filed 2 weeks before the election, the public about it ends up being sort of a political. It's not to get at ethics. If you're filing the complaint 2 weeks before the election, they could have filed this 6 months prior or 9 months prior. It's a political gimmick at that point. I don't like that. especially if somebody like Emily O'Brien can't respond to it. I think that's what's happening.
If I heard Rebecca right, it's potentially a felony
if they respond and defend themselves.
So, I mean, now you're putting this person like, okay, so there's, and by the way, I did not write. In fact, I got some blowback from people like, oh, or why aren't you writing about Representative Emily O'Brien? Because it's a terrible situation. I don't know what's true in there. Right. And the problem is we have somebody it was Representative Brandon Pritchard, and then also Dustin Goverlo at the North Dakota. So at the North Dakota Watchdog Network, but more so Brandon Pritchard for transparently political reasons, trumpets the fact that an ethics complaint has been filed, and then Representative O'Brien, by law, cannot respond to it. How in the world is that a fair process?
Right. Yeah, that's got to be fixed. And I got the impression Rebecca wants to fix it. I would assume after this primary election, there's going to be a lot of legislators who want to fix that process.
And I hope lawmakers come to it from the perspective that we could turn the Ethics Commission into something that really, really works well. Right. And again, I think maybe put a pin in some of the more complicated things. Let's do some low-hanging fruit. Let's consolidate some of the transparency stuff. I think the Ethics Commission could do a lot in that regard.
And again, who's against an Ethics Commission, right? I mean, it's hard to say I'm against an Ethics Commission just on the face of it.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's the reason it passed.
Of course, that's what I'm saying.
But the problem is I was against what I consider to be poorly designed Ethics Commission, and I would argue that that's still the case. I'm not against ethics. I'm against, bad mechanisms for that don't end up redounding to more ethical behavior. And again, not a criticism of Rebecca Binstock or the current commission. They're abiding by the laws that the voters passed.
I'm going to defend the process a little bit because there was an effort to pass this legislatively several times before it went to the ballot. The legislators chose not to fix it that way.
That's fair.
And it created a situation where the voters had to do it.
That's fair. That is fair. But I think this also validates my view of the ballot box as just a bad place to make complicated. The ballot box would be a good place if it's just a thumbs up or a thumbs down to some question, right? Like, should recreational marijuana be legal? Thumbs up, thumbs down. That's pretty straightforward, right? Should we abolish property taxes even though I oppose that ballot measure? That's a pretty straightforward question. Something like this, it's a terrible place.
Yeah. And maybe it's the thumbs up, thumbs down, and then have the legislature figure out
have the voters. I honestly, if I was going to reform the ballot measure process, what I would do is I would make it so that we don't create the law at the ballot. The voters give the legislature direction. So the voters would say, we want an ethics commission. Now the legislature has that mandate and they're obliged to create one.
And then if you're going to in a way that the voters like, maybe there's a mechanism that's happening.
I'm open to that. Let's see, what else is there to talk about? Let's talk about national politics. I have a column up this morning as we record this about some of the stupid things we debate about. And we're having this thing, one of my examples was whether or not Kamala Harris was the border czar. I think this is very dumb. She was clearly assigned the border issue as a policy by President Biden. We use the term czar in American politics as kind of a colloquialism for an official who's been assigned to a specific policy area. That clearly happened. I realize it's not probably optimal for Kamala Harris to have so much exposure to what has been an intractable issue, but that's the reality. The other hand is we also had this debate about whether or not, and Republicans were flipping out because FBI Director Christopher Wray, who, by the way, was appointed by Donald Trump, he said in some of his testimony before Congress, responding to a question, that it may not have been the bullet that injured Donald Trump's ear and resulted in those bloody photographs we all saw. It may have been shrapnel from something the bullet hit, like the teleprompter. And everybody kind of flipped out. And I'm thinking, who cares? Like, whether he was hit by the bullet or somebody tried to murder the man.
Yeah, and if the bullet hit his ear or a bunch of glass hit his ear because a bullet hit the glass, it doesn't matter. So, I mean, from my perspective, somebody tried to shoot the former president of the United States. Full stop.
I don't think anybody is trying to say, oh, it's less serious now because it was just shrapnel. No.
Yeah.
No, it's every bit as serious. Whatever injured Donald Trump, it's every bit as serious either way. Somebody tried to murder the former president who might be the president again, and all politics aside, that's flipping terrible. And we got to figure out.
Terrible, but somewhere somebody's thinking, well, he'll seem more badass if it was a bullet rather than Trump.
Exactly. Like, that's it. And these are these stupid things that we debate about. And I think another stupid thing is J.D. Vance making some comments about about people, childless people or whatever, which I think everybody who is adopted, everybody who has Chad, I know you've adopted.
Yep.
I have a blended family where my wife, I have my daughter from my first marriage, and then my wife and I have 2 additional children. We have a blended family, and I just, why would you bring this up? The comments are so stupid. Why are we debating about this? Why?
So here's the question that I have on this, because you're right. He managed to offend so many people.
Right.
And it's not a clip from a long time ago. It's from when he was running for Senate 2.5 years ago.
The clip was on Tucker Carlson's show. I think when Tucker was still on Fox.
2021. Did the Trump people not vet him at all? Did they not look back 2.5 years ago? Did they not think? And now he's out that it said we should tax people differently depending on their children. The other thing that doesn't make any sense, Rob, is 2 of the 3 people he talked about, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, and AOC, 2 of the 3 of them have children. One has stepchildren, one has adopted children. I mean, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene at one point made some comment about if you've never given birth, you don't know what love is of children or something like that. I mean, those things are just dumb, Rob.
Hey, you know who has a blended family? Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Multiple wives, multiple children by multiple women. And you know what? Not passing any judgment on that at all.
In just thinking about the amount of families that I know, some are traditionally how they have their kids, some are blended, some have adopted, some have got them through IVF, some have used surrogacy to do that. If we're pro-family, we're pro all families. I'm pro all families.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
I just don't understand how poorly, I mean, Rob, when we interviewed Sandy Sanford, one of the things I said is, I can't believe that the Republicans are more unified than Democrats. Fast forward a week, now I think Democrats are more unified than Republicans.
So you mentioned something that we're starting to see some articles about replacing J.D. Vance as a running mate. I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't either, but how quickly things change in 1 week. Isn't that nuts?
I think the world, and actually my print column for the weekend, which I actually wrote yesterday, as we were recording this on Friday, I wrote it. My deadline for that is Thursday morning. And in it, I kind of, tongue in cheek wrote, maybe Trump should have gone with Burgum. Because the world changed a little bit, right? I think the J.D. Vance selection is evidence that Donald Trump was convinced that Joe Biden was staying in the race.
And he was overconfident.
And if Joe Biden's staying in the race, then doubling down on your base with somebody like J.D. Vance makes sense. Makes a certain type of sense. Now that Kamala Harris has changed the game, and now that she can potentially, I think the analogy you and I were talking about on the break is for those who followed North Dakota's U.S. House primary. What you and I talked about extensively was that Rick Becker had a ceiling, a pretty hard ceiling. He had about a third of the Republican vote, but he couldn't appeal outside of it. He couldn't dig into moderate Republicans. He just couldn't.
Didn't try to.
And didn't try to, right? He doubled down. Everything his campaign was organized was around sort of appealing to people who were already going to vote for him. And whereas Julie Fedorchak, we argued, even though at the beginning she was polling behind Becker, she always had more blue sky over her head. She had broader appeal, and also during the course of her campaign, worked to convince people and to bring people in and sort of build a coalition of support, and that's why she won decisively. I think Donald Trump at the national level, and understanding, again, we're talking about an election that's going to be settled by the Electoral College and not strictly the popular vote, and it's also a general election, not a primary, so it's a different situation. But I think Donald Trump's got the same problem. I think he has, much like Rick Becker, has a dedicated, enthusiastic, engaged, very durable base of support. But I also think he has a very hard time getting any sort of appeal outside of that base. Now, in fairness, that base was enough to win him an election in the Electoral College in 2016. But that is a dicey way to win elections. Kamala Harris arguably has more blue sky over her head. And I think as long as she doesn't, if she doesn't narrow that blue sky by alienating independent moderate voters, I think she wins.
Well, and she already started to try to do that a couple of days ago by going after the protesters during the Netanyahu speech. I mean, she basically said that behavior was unacceptable.
Yeah. Which was, by the way, disgusting behavior.
Absolutely, yeah.
By the way, if you're waving around a sign that is pro Hamas, or you're waving around a sign that, or you're supporting people who are waving those signs, you're on the wrong side. Like, there's no nuance to that. Hamas is an evil organization.
Right. But I think when you think about her, Kamala, and going back to the J.D. Vance comment, which are irritating women, all political stripes, you have this. She's already showed she's increased Biden's percentage of the African-American vote by 7% in all the polling, Hispanics by 4 or 5. Women are going up. And she's going to go above that. I mean, her numbers are going to go above that. I think if Democrats can maintain this enthusiasm for 100 days, which is a huge ask, 100 days is a long time, but you do have the advantage of the Olympics, you have the advantage of the DNC, and all of a sudden you're into early voting. I think you do have that opportunity. But I think what's amazing about the polling that I've seen is that, and it sort of goes to your point, Trump went through this amazing period of time, political amazing period of time, terrible for the country, frankly, but he had the RNC convention, he named his VP, you had the assassination attempt. Those are all things
and you also had his opponent, his former opponent, completely crumble and fall out of the race.
So you have all these things that you think would dramatically move the polling in his favor. I mean, I thought maybe he'd come out of this RNC up 8 to 10 points nationally. There was no movement. If there's any movement now, it's towards Harris.
All the movement when all those things were happening, and again, I don't want to describe the assassination attempt as a good thing because it was terrible and disgusting and indefensible.
Yeah,
but it did have potentially beneficial in that it was going to create sympathy, potentially beneficial political ramifications.
Right.
Again, wish it never happened. Wish he'd never been harmed. Wish none of us had to see that. But I mean, that's what it was. But the only thing that changed during that time is that Joe Biden was sinking. Right? Donald Trump wasn't going up. Joe Biden was going down. And and obviously he reached a point where it was clear he wasn't going to win. And then Kamala Harris came in, and I in the early polls, and by the way, David Axelrod said, Donald Trump's still the favorite candidate, and I think that's right in this moment. But I think again, I think it's very much like the Republican primary we just threw, where yes, Kamala Harris has brought it back to where she's essentially tied with Donald Trump, behind him slightly in most of the battleground states. I think that she has blue sky over her head and Donald Trump doesn't. She has the opportunity. But Kamala Harris has to win this, right? I don't think Donald Trump can do anything at this point to change how voters view him. I think Kamala Harris can, and that's going to be her advantage, and that's what she's got to do in the next 100 days.
What Donald Trump can do, though, to Harris's advantage, is motivate her base even more. Like, I don't think Trump cannot say terrible things about women or race or things like that, which will again help with those communities that she has to do well at. I also think this might just be the start of the J.D. Vance Oppo research. And when you're seeing people like Meghan McCain coming out and saying even MAGA women are offended by this guy, this is a problem. And 2 years ago, we thought this whole election was going to be about women because of Roe being overturned. We might be getting back there again.
I think there was a moment where that wasn't going to be true. And I think maybe you're right now, because it does. I mean, we've kind of entered the identity politics zone, and you're going to have some built-in enthusiasm for having the first female president of the United States. It's understandable that women would be excited about that. And I say that that's a reality in politics. I don't always like. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time caring about the skin color or the religion or the gender of our elected officials. I care a lot more about the policy.
But one of the policies that J.D. Vance is talking about is we should tax people without children more money. That's a policy.
That's fair. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And there's no ignoring. Identity does matter. It does matter.
Right.
So it's going to be really interesting. I think Kamala Harris has an opportunity, and if she executes, much like I was saying with Julie Fedorchak, and again, Julie Fedorchak's probably not going to enjoy being compared to Kamala Harris. But
let's be clear, Julie Fedorchak and Kamala Harris could not be any different politically. Let's just put that.
I don't want people out there like, did you hear what that liberal port had to say? Julie Fedorchak's a big liberal too. No, that's not fair to our friend Julie Fedorchak, who has profound policy disagreements with Kamala Harris, as do I, by the way.
Of course.
But I looking at it just strictly politically, Kamala Harris is the one with the opportunity. And if she executes, she wins, just as Julie Fedorchak did.
And I mean, I think her VP choice is going to be so important here. Mark Kelly, clearly angling for it. Shapiro. Andy Brashear from Kentucky seems to be the guy who's being the most aggressive, I'm saying, to try to get it. And Tim Walz. I mean, Tim Walz has been doing the tour of cable news. And that guy's funny. I mean, I think he's really, really great. One of the things he keeps saying is, these people are weird. I mean, the things they talk about, wanting to ban books and whatever, they're just weird. Yeah. And, it's just a funny word to use in this context.
Well, it is. It's kind of the Minnesota nice word a little bit, right? Oh, those weirdos.
And he's at one point said,
I don't know about these weirdos getting all wrapped around the axle about
weirdos. What he talked about going to Thanksgiving dinner and having a fight with your weird uncle. I don't want to fight with all the weirdos anymore.
Well, then maybe he doesn't want to be vice president, because that kind of seems that's the job, is you're going to have to fight with weirdos. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I do think if Harris can execute, she can win. And I really hope, and maybe this isn't going to matter, but I hope that I want to vote for, I would really like her to come out and just kind of like, I'm going to be a candidate for America. Like whatever I did previously in the Senate or whatever, like the world has changed so much, even from the time when she served in the United States Senate. We're in such a unique place. I would like her to say, listen, a lot of the stuff, I'm rethinking everything. And maybe people would see that as a political calculation, and she's just trying to be a blank slate when she really has a record. But I think there's a way you could do that authentically and say, I understand, I get it, America. I understand that we are going to have to do a better job of representing everybody and listening to everybody and trying to find a consensus and trying to find our way through this. I think a unity message like that would go well.
And I was impressed that she met with Netanyahu one-on-one. You had mentioned that the frustration with her not going to the speech, but she did meet with him. I also think the other thing that's interesting going on, a week ago, we thought the map was getting smaller, that it literally was just going to be Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. But this change, all of a sudden, Arizona's back, Georgia's back, North Carolina's back because of the resources that Kamala has coming in, and also because of the high number of African-American voters in those communities that might be motivated. So it's just like literally this week has been crazy. I mean, I think you said it to Adam Goldwyn on Monday. This year, that's why I'm going to butcher it.
We had a good year last week. Or no, we had a rough year last week or something. I'm butchering my own quote now too.
Anyway, I think it's a great time for us to be talking about politics. So it's fun. It changes every 2 days.
It does. One last thing I wanted to cover is this lawsuit filed by Citizens United, and then you see a bunch of Republican entities, including the North Dakota Republican Party, sort of joining the lawsuit, arguing that Kamala Harris, if my understanding of the suit's correct, they're arguing that she is in receipt of excessive political donations because she got them from the Biden-Harris campaign, and she didn't have any responsibility, and she didn't have a right to do that without first becoming the official nominee, which I kind of look at it, it just seems like they're trying to create headlines.
Yeah, the campaign finance folks that I've seen write about this on the right and the left. I think I saw Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign finance guy said that this lawsuit's not going anywhere. I mean, to me, it's a sign of desperation because at the end of the day, if Kamala gets this $100 million or not, she's still going to raise a ton of money.
Yeah.
And it seems like a waste of time, but it's the move they have.
It's muddying the waters.
Right.
But I hate this stuff. Whoever does it, Republicans do it or Democrats do it like this. We're going to settle questions in court instead of. I mean, are people unhappy who donated to the Biden-Harris campaign? Are they unhappy now that their money is going to Harris?
Well, I'm glad you asked somebody who's donated to these campaigns. I am not unhappy with this. And I think you'd have a tough time finding a Biden donor who's just like, I can't believe my money's going to Kamala Harris now. Well, she's the vice president.
And there's got to be provisions in the law where if a candidate drops out or if they die or something or become incapacitated in some way, like there's got to be a provision in the law where their money doesn't just evaporate, where something can happen to it.
Yeah, and it's my understanding she's listed as one of the candidates on the original account. So it's like if you're giving to Biden-Harris. You weren't just giving to Joe.
And so if Harris is also getting the money, So I don't see that going anywhere. But it created headlines, and I think that was the real point because. And that's the thing about those things, whether it's an ethics complaint or always be wary of the timing of these things, whether it's an ethics complaint filed in North Dakota or a lawsuit filed over presidential campaigns. These things always get resolved after the election. And it's just about creating headlines and turning your head during the election. And a lot of times that means you can safely ignore them.
Yep. There you go.
All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you so much for listening. I don't have anything booked so far for next week, so you're just going to have to tune in to figure out what the heck we're going to talk about.
Oh, the anticipation is going to kill people.
In the meantime, something you could do is if you're listening to this, whatever platform you're listening, if you'd give us a thumbs up or a review or assign us some stars, something like that, that really helps. And I want to mention again, I had a listener who was surprised to learn because they said, I really like listening to podcasts on YouTube. You should put your podcasts on YouTube. Fun fact, we were already on YouTube. So if you search for Plain Talk on YouTube, you'll find us. We're under the forum account. I think there was another Plain Talk when I was trying to do live streams for a while. Ignore those. But if you look at the one that's under the forum, when you search for it, you'll find us. That's another way to listen if you like YouTube. If you're a YouTube aficionado, there you go. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.